And a very good morning to you and Happy New Year. We're live in London and you're listening to the first Monocle on Sunday of 2026. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, we assess the latest on the fire in the Swiss resort of Crans-Montana. I'll be joined from Zurich by Monocle's Laura Kramer and from Lisbon by our editorial director Tyler Brûlé. Plus, we'll be recapping and trying to examine this weekend's events in Venezuela with the help of my guests, Terry Stiasny, Vincent McAviney. A very warm welcome. A busy day today when it comes to news. What have you spotted, Vinny?
Good morning. Well, we'll be finding out why the new Chinese embassy in London is yet another headache for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer as he tries to right the ship at the start of the year, and how those in Iran who've been taken to the streets for a week now are feeling inspired by what's gone on in Venezuela.
Thank you for that. We'll get the latest from Oslo too.
I'm Lars Bevanger, Monocle's Oslo correspondent, and I'll bring Norwegian reactions to the attempted regime change in Venezuela only weeks after opposition leader Maria Corina Machado received the Nobel Peace Prize. And why do tourists keep crashing cars in the Arctic?
It's the 4th of January 2026, live from London. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you. Joining me around the studio table, Terry Stiasny, author and political journalist and author of the book last year published, Believable Lies. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
And Vincent McAviney, journalist and Monocle Radio voice regularly around the microphone. Good morning to you, Vinny. How was your New Year?
Good morning. Happy New Year. Yeah, it was nice. It was the London house party with some friends trying to catch sight of the fireworks from the rooftop.
Excellent. And did you?
Just about.
Brilliant. That's all that counts. That's literally the only thing that matters here in London is, did I see a firework? How about you, Terry?
Well, also in London, didn't see the fireworks. You could definitely hear the fireworks, but you couldn't quite see them. I probably could have done if I'd gone up to the very top of the house, but had a lovely Christmas. Christmas was in Bruges, which I recommend is absolutely beautiful, cold and sunny, and there was ice skating and chocolate.
What took you to Bruges?
It's a meeting point between my mum in the south of France and us in London, and we thought, where's a nice city, nice Christmassy city that we could go, and it was lovely. It was a good choice.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's head to Lisbon to hear from our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. A very happy New Year to you, Tyler. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy New Year, Emma.
How was your festivities this last week?
Festivities last week were, I wouldn't say subdued, but I joined, in fact, our Juliet Lindley and some other friends up in the mountains. We were in St. Moritz, but of course, as we know, everyone awoke to the horrendous news and a story that has really dominated not just the European press but much of the global press this week. Of course, until events in Venezuela over the last 36 hours. Of course, the story of the fire in Crans-Montana.
Indeed. I mean, Venezuela, I think we will talk about in about 10-15 minutes time, because we'll be joined by our foreign editor Lex Self, who'll bring us up to date with jaw-dropping events there. But yes, let's focus on this fire, because I think that the element of surprise from outside Switzerland was very much that you would walk into a newsroom or you would turn on your television and you would just think this is actually an impossible event for Switzerland.
Indeed, and I think that is part of the soul searching that is going on right now. I think there was a real sense of shock for the first 48, 72 hours. You could say it is still lingering, and we can talk in a moment about. And I think now some really tough questions are being asked. But there was this moment of just everyone being stunned. Could this happen in Switzerland? How is it happening in Switzerland? And then I think I would say, in the following days, just the understanding and just the nature of a fire of this scale and this many injuries, 119 people, and of course, 50 of these people having to be flown to neighboring countries or even further afield in neighboring countries for treatment, because, a country of 9 million people, that many burns victims, of course, within the span of a morning, the country simply is not able to cope with those numbers. So I think, there's been much focus as well, just also on the logistical exercise of how do you get these people the right treatment across Europe as well. And I would say now, if you look at the Swiss press, it started, I would say, probably late Friday, early Saturday, but I think questions being asked about Of course, the time for identification. Why are things taking so long? And of course, what is, one of the world's richest, one of the world's most well-resourced countries? Why this waiting period? But of course, now I think the bigger issues of responsibility.
Indeed, right. Let's bring in Laura Kramer, Monocle's senior producer, who joins us from the Zurich studio. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning, Emma. Hi, Tyler.
You were up at Crans-Montana a few hours after it happened, so just tell us what you saw, please.
Well, I got to Crans-Montana 12 hours after the fire, and there was still, I'll have to be honest, there was still the smell of smoke in the site, and the cordon at the time was quite large, so buses couldn't even really get to the area. So I got a chance to walk from the funicular site to the area, and that meant I really had to take a look through the town before getting to the site of the fire. Now, at first I was quite surprised to see restaurants were full. It was lunchtime, people were eating, and many were skiing. And I spoke to a few people on the ground who said to me exactly what Tyler was talking about. They didn't quite realize the extent of the tragedy until much later in the day. They had obviously woken up to the news of the fire and at the bar, but they had said to me they never expected that so many people would be dead. They were very surprised, and that was the sentiment I heard there over and over again. I remember in the morning, originally there were reports of maybe a handful of people, but by the time that the first press conference had happened, we had heard about dozens. So the mood very quickly shifted. Obviously, people were getting up early to hit the slopes, and information was still not fully available before they went about their day. So in the town, it was going through basically an ordinary day, but only slowly realizing what was actually living through. And when I got there were only about a handful of journalists, and they were really mostly reporters who happened to have just been on holiday at the resort or nearby, and they very quickly ran to the scene to report for their various outlets. So it was still quite a small media operation at that stage. We saw maybe a few flowers were starting to be laid out, and when I got there, police were still putting up additional barriers to block the views as more cameras were slowly trickling in. So we kind of set up this sort of press bar area where a few of us, had left tripods and were charging laptops as everybody was filing. And that's where we heard, I started hearing some of the stories from the people. The restaurants had, for example, provided tablecloths to cover some of the bodies, but also curtains for the injured who were in the cold. One man had said to me that he had helped with getting some people out, and he had tried to return and get some rest, but he couldn't manage because of everything that he had kind of witnessed. So he had to try to listen to music to try to calm down after everything. I saw also a young boy was there. I'd say maybe 15 years old. He spoke French, and I was speaking to his mother, and she said to me that he hadn't heard from his friend who was inside. Similarly, one of the journalists who was there with her family, she was constantly getting texts from her daughter because she was asking for updates because she also hadn't heard from her friend who was at the bar. So at every point in the area, there were people who were affected, and I think overall, at that time, most people were still looking for answers and some comfort. But, for many now, the hardest part has only just begun, as Tyler said, because now it's about the waiting and not knowing and bracing for the worst.
We have some developments which have just come to light in the last couple of minutes. Tyler, I'll come to you on this one. They've identified 16 more victims. The youngest is 14 years old, a Swiss girl. But the group of those who have been identified now are Swiss, Italian, Romanian, Turkish and French. This is a tiny Swiss ski resort, and yet the number of different nationalities involved in this tragedy resonate globally.
Absolutely. I would say I'm somewhat surprised how many Swiss actually, the majority of the people who are either in burns units in hospital or succumbed to their injuries or died that evening are Swiss, though, because this is one of you would say it's probably one of the top 5, top 6 resorts in Switzerland, incredibly international. But at the same time, as we've heard, it is a very much a local affair. This is one of these places where, of course, international visitors, but also locals also mixed as well. Hence the number of Swiss people. It's also part of why you've seen this mobilization of course, neighboring and other European countries. Ms. von der Leyen also, enacting these measures of an emergency response, where of course nations across the EU and also affiliate countries have really gathered together, and that is why you've seen, of course, a number of Italians who, of course, were injured and burned in this fire, have been transferred to Milan. Belgians have gone back to Belgium. But at the same time, those countries have also been taking, of course, Swiss injured as well. So I believe, as of today, in fact, they said that of the 119 people that are being treated, 50 have been transferred overseas. And it was interesting, when I was just departing Zurich for Lisbon yesterday, I saw a Rega jet, and just for our listeners who aren't familiar, Rega is the helicopter rescue service in Switzerland, globally admired, really sort of stands by a reputation that no one is ever more than 15 minutes away from a hospital. They have 21 helicopters across the country. They have 3 jets, and these Challenger jets have been, of course, working overtime, dispatching, of course, burns victims to Graz, to Innsbruck, of course, to Brussels, and of course elsewhere in Europe as well. France taking a number of people. So it's just interesting that, and Emma, you'd be familiar with this, is in that sort of Swiss way as well. They like to also, and maybe this is also partly trying to make themselves feel better at a time when there are so many questions being asked. Okay, look how efficiently this evacuation has been run. You do see a lot of stories in the tickers talking about that, yes, the emergency response has worked well. Things that have been, of course, tested countless times in the Valais at a national level with Rega, etc. All of these things worked. Of course, what hasn't worked, though, and there's many question marks, as we see in the press right now. I would say one of the really the standout stories at the moment is that of course bars are supposed to, and well, I think all facilities, catering facilities in the Valais, depends canton by canton, should have annual reviews and inspections, but what we've heard is that there were only 3 at the Constellation since 2015.
And indeed, and this morning the prosecutors have said that a French couple who owned the Constellation have now been placed under criminal investigation. They're suspected of killing by negligence, causing bodily harm and arson. So this is a serious thing. And staying with you, Tyler, the words that you've just used in the last few minutes, globally admired, reputation, the Swiss way, efficiency. These are all things that when you are in Switzerland, you take for granted almost in a way that raises a smile. But now these really, really big questions are now needing to be asked. The NZZ am Sonntag is saying, wie konnte das passieren? How could this have happened?
Absolutely. And this is, and again, we were talking about, what at this time of year, what is this country known for? Well, it's known for hospitality. It is known for alpine living and alpine lifestyle, and of course, it's also known for safety and security as well. So you could say, well, yeah, great on one side that the evacuation and all of these measures have gone well, but of course, there was quite literally an ignition point for all of this, and these will be the questions. And listen, I'm quite surprised that this is the couple in question are the Morettis, of course, Swiss prosecutors, are saying that they are innocent until proven guilty or until there's a conviction. But things are moving, I think, quite quickly. We've also seen Montana is launching a class action suit as well. We heard that these people are they a flight risk? And then, of course, one of the stories that has been breaking now as well by La Parisienne newspaper is that Mr. Moretti has quite a checkered past and has spent time behind bars for a variety of offenses, everything from forced captivity to other rather sort of surprising offenses as well. So this is going to play out, I think it's speed now as well, and I would say probably in parallel. I think going back to what this means for the nation. Guy Parmelin, the president of the Swiss Federation, he has just called for a national day of mourning now. So this coming Friday, the 9th of January, will be a national day of mourning. Bells will ring at 2 o'clock across all of Switzerland, and there'll be a minute's silence observed at that time as well. So as we're saying, this is really unthinkable. And of course, here you have the president of the Swiss Federation also, saying that this is one of the worst disasters in the country's history, which is really remarkable when you think about things that can happen at scale all over the world. But here we had a small, packed bar early on New Year's Eve, which now, of course, numbers are now hovering just below 50, 47 people confirmed dead, and upwards of 119 people in hospital across Europe.
And Tyler, people will have lost trust in Swiss hospitality as a result of this.
I think up to a point, but I think that the one thing that you have to sort of remember there is, and we've talked about this during the pandemic, there is this sort of this Swiss pragmatism as well that comes into play that, of course, dreadful things happen and there will be investigations around this. But there is that sense of self-responsibility. And I think that is something which is already, you also see coming through right now, where you had, press, whether they're domestic or international press, asking various questions about, should there be a ban on sparkler? Should there be a ban on these things? And in this case, you had the Attorney General saying, look, let's let this investigation run its course. Sparklers have always been with us. So, the answer is not a ban, on what is a celebratory domestic item. That is not the core of what is being discussed here. So I think that in that sense as well, I'm not sure in a way, in terms of the erosion of confidence in the industry overall, I think that, brand, and I think just going back to our point, I think this is why there was this fast mobilization. I mean, we are in a world of PR and optics as well, and I think that is why things have also sort of, I think the country wanted to show that, okay, there cannot be, we cannot let anything drop at this point. When it comes to recovery and rescue and being efficient, my goodness, we need to make this happen because the world's lenses are focused on this country right now.
Tyler, stay with us on the line from Lisbon. But let's say thank you very much indeed to Laura Kramer, Monocle's senior producer, joining us from the Zurich studio, because the time here in London is 9:18 a.m. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday. I have Terry Stiasny and Vinny McAviney in the studio with me. But let us also just jump straight onto the other huge story, which has overwhelmed the headlines in the last 48 hours, which is the fact that in the early hours of Saturday morning, there were the sounds of American aircraft flying over the Venezuelan capital, Caracas. US troops took the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro into custody. Donald Trump says he'll be put on trial accused of drug smuggling, and also that the United States will now run Venezuela until there is a judicious transition to a government. To tell us more, Alexis Self, Monocle's foreign editor, joins me. Good morning to you, Lex.
Good morning, Emma.
Just bring us up to date with where we are now. And we've had these incredible images of Maduro on a flight with his eyes and ears blocked. He's now in New York, isn't he?
Yeah, he's in a Brooklyn jailhouse. He was flown into New York City early this morning, and you saw images of the helicopter in which he was traveling, skirting the Statue of Liberty, which added to the whole cinema of the past 24 hours, and I'm sure was planned by, if not Trump, someone close to him. He's sitting in a Brooklyn jailhouse and awaiting arraignment and potentially could be in court today in Manhattan to hear the charges against him. Meanwhile, the world is reeling, and actually after the kind of shocked international response yesterday, and certainly among US allies, more leaders have come out overnight, and people in the US, including within the Republican Party, to condemn the actions of the US government in quite strong words.
Thank you for that. We've still got Tyler on the line from Lisbon. I mean, just watching what happened in the last 24 hours, when you have Delta Force snatching the president of a South American country, that is something that is incredibly difficult to make sense of.
It is, and of course there was much sort of saber rattling, and of course everyone was paying attention to frigates and destroyers and an aircraft carrier that were, of course, prowling the Caribbean Sea for the past weeks. But this happened at speed, of course, and then at the same time, Emma, that here we see. Of course, Maduro, bundled into an aircraft, I believe, first to Puerto Rico, and then transferred to another aircraft that took him just outside of New York, and then of course brought into the city, and of course with just again, Lex sort of talked about the cinema of this. If anyone sort of saw the transfer from aircraft, the sheer number of agents from various of course, law enforcement agencies as part of the U.S. federal government was absurd. I mean, here you are already in a secured facility, and I think I must have counted 27, 28 people in body armor around him. You're thinking, okay. You managed to, of course, snatch him out of his own city, and of course there were injuries on the part of some U.S. forces, but it was so bit heavy-handed, and I think we're sort of standing back and looking how absurd this is, and thinking that we're going to run the show in Venezuela. Of course, when there are parts of a functioning government. There is a political apparatus at a municipal level, at a city level, running the capital. Not to mention much of the rest of the country. So. Yeah. Yes, you could say yes. Basket case, banana republic. From many angles, but at the same time, this is a sovereign state.
Indeed, and Lex, let's bring you in on this one. I mean, Tyler was talking about the scale, and I think the Americans last night boasted of personnel being deployed from 20 different bases, 150 aircrafts, bombers, fighters, reconnaissance, and a plan that, if you read the New York Times today, had been well rehearsed for months and months and months. There is an absolutely absurd nature to all this, isn't there?
Yeah, as Tyler was saying, the US is going a different route in Latin America to perhaps what it was doing in the 70s and 80s, which I think was largely a response to the quagmire and the kind of great trauma of Vietnam. When the US was very open about its desire to affect the political process of another country. So the CIA and engaged in subterfuge and spying and regime change, the kind of subtle, under the radar way. This is not that. But, the response to the way that the US operated in Latin America in the 70s and 80s and 90s was that, lots of countries in the region turned against the US and went an opposite route politically. So will this produce a different outcome? I don't think so. I don't understand what the end game is here in terms of this, very aggressive show of might and an attempt at political coercion and bridge burning. As I said earlier, countries in the region, most notably Brazil and Mexico, other big, large democracies in the Western Hemisphere have come out and very clearly spoken out against what the US is doing here. I don't see, they've achieved the short-term goal of deposing Maduro, but what goes into that gulf? And more importantly, how do other countries in the region react to the US so obviously and aggressively and over the top? Meddling in the region? I don't think it will be in the US interest in the long term.
Vinny, you've been following this for the last 24 hours. Let's bring you in on this. The point that Lex and Tyler both make there is that the United States is extremely good at going in and breaking stuff. Yet the long-term consequences are much, much more uncertain. But also just the fact is that other countries now and are looking at Venezuela and wondering what on earth is going to happen next. You were focusing on Iran yesterday, weren't you? Protesters emboldened by what they saw in Caracas.
Yeah, that's right. I was working on a piece in Iran and I was speaking to people in the country there and getting videos for the, week now. There have been protesters going out because they've got a cost of living crisis. The currency has rapidly devalued. Food prices are up 50% on this time last year. And they've had a really tricky year, well, the regime there, because they had the airstrikes from the US. They also have had this huge drought in Tehran because they've mismanaged a reservoir system. And people there, this is a full week of people kind of across, whereas in 2022, the big protests were about women's rights, a lot of women to the streets. This is economic, so it is across everywhere. And people had seen the images from Venezuela on Iranian social media. They had seen the Truth Social post from Trump the day before saying that he would protect them. And so they are going out with the Ayatollah Khamenei having to say, we're going to have to suppress this. So that is something to watch. I think my other things to watch in the coming days are you've got allies like the UK taking a line which essentially, we're not going to shed any tears for Maduro going, but we've got to respect international law. Then you've got the region, President Sheinbaum in Mexico, Trump yesterday, very disparaging of her, saying she's not in control of that country, the cartels are, and I think we need to go in there. Whether he gets a taste for this sort of breaking sovereignty now in South America, his Don Roe doctrine, as he redubbed it yesterday, of thinking this is our backyard, our sphere of influence, we'll go in and deal with this. It's going to be interesting to watch.
I think this is one of the things that's interesting about it. I think during the sort of the run up to the Iraq War, wasn't it? It was described as the pottery barn principle. Like if you break something, then you are also responsible for paying for it and fixing it. And I think the big question here is going to be what actually happens. Trump was talking about we are going to be going in and running Venezuela. Are you really? If you look at what happened in Iraq when they did try to do that, when they went into the country and there were supposedly plans for, creating a democratic government, and it ended up with a country where people didn't even stop at the traffic lights because they didn't think that sort of law now applied there. Is there a plan for what happens to Venezuela next? Trump is saying, the oil companies will go in and they will be, effectively trying to rebuild the infrastructure. And a lot of sort of slightly stunned silence at this point from American oil companies who, when asked by the newspapers, have said, kind of, let's wait and see what's happening. We're not responding to any request for comment there. So I would question, how much they have thought this through and who is even now in charge of Venezuela. Supposedly the deputy president is going to step up. There are questions over whether she is even actually in the country. The other potential leaders, some of them aren't in the country. Who is in charge? How does apart from the obvious breaches of law that this has brought about? I think we are, as Lex was saying, having a bit of a flashback to the 1980s, things like Panama, for instance. What is the legal process going to be in New York? Can you put someone on trial who was, effectively, even if not necessarily legitimately, a head of state?
Tyler, just coming back to you, from your position, looking ahead to 2026, we've had two events in the last 48 hours, which have many people a week ago would believe to be genuinely incredible. So when it comes to setting editorial pathways for the next year, how much are events like this shaking things down dynamically?
Well, I come back to, and maybe you're, maybe you've been hacking into my emails, Emma, because there is an editorial summit which will happen in Zurich on Thursday with all of our top team, print, digital, radio, and of course all of the other elements that extend beyond that as well. And I would say part of the message there is ensuring that we have, listen, we're not the New York Times and we're not the BBC. Monocle is not a huge news organization, but of course, we do have some spread and we do have some bureaus. And it's a question of where are we firing things up, and also being responsive. And I think it's Laura, a very good example without prompting. Was of course was in Zurich, made her way to Crans-Montana. It's important that we are witness to of course what is happening, what is unfolding. We have, I would say, a semi-dormant setup in Toronto at the moment, and I think everything we've been talking about. We only have to go back to, of course, the sort of the start of the fraying of relationships between Washington and Ottawa. Listen, if I was Mark Carney, I think he should be happy that he's in en route right now to Paris. For the coalition of the willing talks, because you don't know, maybe some Chinook helicopters could descend on Ottawa. It's you look back at Trump saying, wouldn't Canada be better off, being a 51st state? Likewise, again, we thought it was unthinkable that there was all of this discussion about Greenland, and that, of course, because the U.S. sees that it's in its sphere of influence, that it is a landmass which is in the Americas, and we've seen what is being, of course, stepped up with diplomatic efforts and U.S. representation within Greenland. It's really not so unthinkable right now that we could also be having this conversation in a number of months that the U.S. has put a move on Greenland, despite the fact that Denmark, I think, again, very nicely last week said they want to buy 3 Poseidon aircraft from Boeing for patrols. Is that appeasement? Could they have maybe gone and bought European aircraft instead? Of course they could have. And it's remarkable to watch, and I think these things could happen. I mean, I don't think we're going to sort of step up Toronto, with the view that we're going to see, Mr. Carney, with sort of headphones and a blindfold put on his head. Who knows, though? I mean, it's a little bit crazy town.
Vinny, you wanted to come in here?
I think just to throw ahead, just to pick up on Terry's point before, I mean, they do seem to have had some kind of cooperation with military and potentially police forces in Caracas. We're getting sort of good details. The Sunday Times and The Guardian today have got that detail. The critical error with Iraq was dismissing the Republican Guard in the first week. And many of those people then formed militias and went into ISIS. And that's when law and order broke down. If you watch the fascinating documentary Once Upon a Time in Iraq, it shows that was the point where, after America did that sort of shock and awe, everything went wrong, and they spent a decade trying to unpick that moment. So whether they can keep control is critical on whether they actually engage the structures that are there now. That was the great mistake. But I think to widen out, I mean, Cuba is one to watch now. The deal between Cuba and Venezuela for many years has been Cuba supplies the doctors and Venezuela gets the oil and keeps Cuba going. Cuba is already, again, suffering cost of living crisis. They've had rolling blackouts for much of the past 18 months because their infrastructure is just so old. And without the support of Venezuela, they are really going to struggle. And the person to watch, I think, in America, it's going to be fascinating, is Marco Rubio. He seems to be, as Secretary of State, the man who has convinced Donald Trump, using very cleverly the drugs thing, something that Trump hates because of his own experience with his brother Fred, who was an alcoholic who died. He's managed to convince him that all the drugs, the fentanyl, the cocaine, and it doesn't, not so much fentanyl really, that's coming kind of from Mexico, but he's convinced Trump it's coming from Venezuela, and that's why they should go after it. And if he can sort of do this sort of 2-for-1 with Venezuela, changing the regime there, and in Cuba, he will be a hero to the Republican movement, particularly in Florida, where you've got a lot of the Cuban Americans, Latinx vote, and he might have just sort of secured himself the nomination for the Republicans, beating out J.D. Vance.
Thank you for that, Vinny. Tyler, we're going to let you go and enjoy the rest of your day, but just quickly, what do we have anything to look forward to, anything to be hopeful about in 2026, please?
Well, hopefully. I was just going to pick up, though, just quickly, Emma, on Vinny's point as well. I think what this also does, and you sort of, whether this is a domino effect or whether this just becomes, a point of an excuse. But we have to also look at China within the context of the story. Of course, what Venezuela has meant, would mean, of course, in terms of oil and energy supply as a partner to China. But we also have to think about the Taiwan topic as well. How can you at this point as well then say, oh, look, naughty you, China, for whether you're sending aircraft over and warships encircling Taiwan, but China can also make a case now very easily saying, if Venezuela's fallen, if Cuba falls soon, well then Taiwan is clearly ours as well. To your point, though, Emma, what can we look forward to? Listen. The good thing is we are moving into a season of hopefully some reasonable individuals getting around a table for discussion and dialogue. As we said, of course, we have this coalition of the willing, some 30-plus nations convening in Paris across tomorrow and Tuesday. So, of course, a focus on Ukraine there. We do have Davos. Is this going to be a bit? I think this is a Davos reset year. So the World Economic Forum at the end of this month. We have the Munich Security Conference coming up. So there is this, certainly a string of major events, convening events, where hopefully there's enough side discussion and reasoned discussion as well. If nothing else, Emma, we're looking at a couple of Monocle weekenders in the not too distant future. Hopefully, one up in the Engadine in Switzerland around the Art Week. So that can. For sure, I can promise you, Emma, there's going to be a Monocle on Sunday coming from St. Moritz then. So that will just be a place to breathe fresh air. And hopefully by that point, we're talking middle of February. We'll have a little bit of perspective on some of the stories that we've been talking about.
Tyler, thank you so much. I suspect that Monocle Radio is going to be quite busy for the next few months as well. It was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us from Lisbon, and a happy new year to you. And thanks also to Monocle's foreign editor, Alexis Self, who joined us a little earlier on. The time here in London is 9:36 a.m. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Terry Stiasny and Vincent McAviney are my panellists today. But we're going to head to Oslo now, because Lars Bevanger, Monocle's Oslo correspondent, is on the line to bring us all the news from where he is. A very happy New Year to you, Lars.
Happy New Year, Emma.
And we stay with Venezuela because of the Norwegian connection to all this.
Yes, of course, the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, was in Oslo only a few weeks ago to receive her Nobel Peace Prize. Now, the Norwegian Nobel Committee, argued that she had been awarded the prize for her work of promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela and for her struggle, importantly, to achieve a just and peaceful transition to democracy. Now, Maria Corina Machado yesterday issued a statement where she appears to support Trump's military intervention in Venezuela. She basically said that Maduro refused to accept a negotiated exit, and the government of the US has fulfilled its promise to enforce the law. Now, this doesn't sit too well with the Nobel Peace Prize, some people in Norway argue now. But of course, this is something the Nobel Committee itself does not comment on. They don't tend to comment on their decisions at all after they've made them. The Norwegian government has come out to, if not condemn US action, they've said that it is in breach of international law, just like most European countries have done after what happened yesterday.
So we have this tricky situation. Terry, let me bring you in on this one. The fact that we have Machado coming out in support of US action, which goes pretty much against the idea of the Nobel Peace Prize at all, and it creates a bit of a headache.
I think there is a headache for the rest of the world, particularly, American allies, in how they respond to this. And I think it's quite notable looking at the way that European leaders, for instance, have reacted to it. And most of it has been very cautious, very hedged about. So Keir Starmer yesterday was saying, well, I'm going to kind of wait and see what's happened. Britain didn't have any involvement with this. Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen talking about it, saying, well, we need to have these conversations with the states. And yes, acknowledging that Maduro, hadn't legitimately won the last elections, but also being, cautious about the way that the US had gone in and done this. But I think, you've seen, opposition parties saying that they felt this was wrong, they felt this was a breach of international law. But I think it's notable how cautious everybody is being so far, and how reluctant they still are to seem to want to upset the United States.
Lars, let's move on to another story it's about havoc on snowy roads. Those pesky tourists are coming and crashing all their cars.
Yes, this is a story that is particularly topical in the north of Norway. Now, there's a huge increase in tourism to places like Tromsø, far into the Arctic Circle, for people who want to come and see the Northern Lights. Now, quite a few of these people come from far away, like Singapore, Taiwan, China, and have very little, if any, experience of driving on snowy roads, which you do get in Norway, most of the country throughout the winter. And in and around Tromsø, the rescue services have seen a 50% increase in call-outs to drag rental cars out of ditches compared to December last year. And there are now calls to try to give these tourists some kind of driving lessons when they arrive before they're allowed to hire a car. Now, that's obviously going to be a bit difficult, and the hire firms are against it. But Norwegians like me, before you get your license, you have to do something called an ice driving course. And basically you go around a track faster and faster until you lose control of your car, just to teach you how different it is to drive on icy roads. We've even seen occasions where tourists have ended up in ski slopes. Now, cross-country ski slopes in Norway are typically, or some of them at least, are made over dirt roads, which are open in summer for cars, and you will find them therefore in your GPS. And tourists have ended up in the middle of a ski piste.
Vinny, you haven't done this in Norway, but you've encountered interesting cars in Iceland.
Yeah, that's right. I went to Iceland in November a few years ago, and had sort of just booked a package that included a car, but hadn't looked too closely at the details of the car. Got to the car hire centre and just saw this huge row of sort of pickup trucks and big 4x4s. And then at the end, a small little Toyota, I think it was an Aygo or a Corolla. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to end up with this one, aren't I? Went into the man at the checkout. He handed me keys, which I could see were Toyota. And I said, do you not think I need something bigger? And he said, no. Most of those will be written off by the end of the season. This is the car you need to keep you safe on the roads. And we did a sort of driving tour for 5 days, and I saw multiple car wrecks of people in those big cars who had obviously got too complacent, thought that they could take anything, and they'd gone on the ice and gone straight off the road, whereas we managed to sort of, because we were quite low to the road, we could sort of see the conditions clearly. We weren't too much weight. If we did start to skid a little bit as well, it was definitely the more sensible route.
Just listening to that, Lars, it sounds like Vinny could set up a driving school where you are.
It sounds absolutely perfect. And he's absolutely right. It is easier to drive a small sort of manual car in icy conditions, because you do feel closer to the surface, as it were. And all these new fancy, big, modern, maybe electric, heavy cars are, they do give you a false sense of security. And if you on top of that have no experience of wintry conditions, chances are you're going to run it off the road.
Right. One thing that you shouldn't do is mix driving with alcohol, and that's something that they want to be absolutely clear about during this year's World Cup, because Norway's done pretty well. It's punching, dare I say it, slightly above its weight, and so people will want to enjoy a drink while they're watching their country do its thing. But that doesn't quite fit with the law, does it?
No, the drinking laws are relatively relaxed in Norway, and most bars and pubs will stay open at weekends at least until 3 a.m. in the morning. And that you might think is enough. But of course, the World Cup this year is in America, and the timings then of the matches, it means that the most kickoffs will be very late at night, Norwegian time, and people will not want to watch their national team maybe in the lead and suddenly being kicked out of the pub because the match is continuing after 3 a.m. So this is obviously a political win if the government manages to change the law temporarily to allow for the places to stay open long enough so that people can stay and watch in their favourite bar their favourite team play. The Prime Minister has said that the government wants to, and I quote him here, find a solution so that the bars and restaurants can stay open longer. And I don't think there's going to be a big problem getting this through Parliament, because as in most countries around the world, people are really into football in Norway as well.
I but thinking about sort of like the wider context of what's happening in Norway at the moment with the last time you were on Monocle on Sunday, you talked to us about middle-aged men who couldn't control their own fireworks. Now we have conversations about football fans who can't control their own drinking. Tourists can't control their own driving. What's going wrong?
I mean, yeah, you might think that Norway is completely out of control, but, most days Norway can be a fairly boring country, which is very much in control. And I think also when you see if you hear that people can stay out drinking till 3 a.m., you might think it's havoc at night when everyone goes home. Most people are quite sensible. Most people do actually take into account that a lot of the bars and restaurants are in neighborhoods where people actually live, so the noise isn't that bad. Nevertheless, there have been some voices worrying about what the effect might be if the Norwegian side, for instance, make some serious gains in the World Cup and people are going to be celebrated when they leave, 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning, if you're trying to sleep and it's an hour before you have to get up to go to work. So we'll see how it goes, but I do think that most people were going to cheer the Norwegian side on and think that, well, this is a temporary thing.
Yes, do all try to keep a lid on it, please. Lars Bavanger, our Oslo correspondent, thank you so much for joining us on the line. This is Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson, joining me around the studio table, Terry Stiasny and Vincent McAviney. Terry, what have you spotted in the papers?
Well, I think it's interesting. We were talking about, is there anything to look forward to in 2026? You were discussing with Tyler. And over the last week, you've been looking at British party leaders' messages to the country at New Year. And they unfailingly start from a point of absolute gloominess.
Brilliant.
And I think it's really interesting to seeing party leaders try to turn this round at the moment. And so Keir Starmer has got an op-ed in the Sunday Times this morning where, again, he starts from this point of absolute sort of January misery. I know people are frustrated. Of course they're frustrated. People long for more money in their pockets. And then he goes on to say, well, look, things will gradually get better. Getting our country back on track is hard, difficult work, and it takes time. I talk about a decade of renewal. And particularly in the way you've seen him sort of deliver his video message, and he's done other interviews today trying to say, I'm still going to be here in a year's time. But it's just such a hard sell at the moment. And I think Keir Starmer personally is not great at doing the sort of sunlit uplands and optimism, because he has got a very flat delivery in the way that he talks. And even if he did say, things are going to be great by the end of the year, people, he doesn't really convey that very well. And I think, coming into this year of British politics, other articles in the papers are talking about how he's still facing potential leadership challenges, and which is just so surprising given the scale of the election victory that he won, not all that long ago.
Indeed, but the political pundits looking at the last year, Vinny, have said, what people were expecting the end of 2025 to be was a sort of a funeral service for the Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch. She's all but disappeared off the scene because Labour has managed to absolutely shoot itself in the foot in its messaging and its turning around of controversial policies, and has allowed the populist right reform to suddenly seize the narrative for 2026. And this is happening all over. If we look at Europe, this is happening in Czechia, this is happening in Poland, this is has been happening for a long time in Hungary and also in Slovakia.
Keir Starmer came in with two big messages, which was, I'm going to improve the country economically and you're going to feel it. And people aren't yet, although we are starting to see inflation come down, interest rates come down. His plan, he thinks that people in 2026 will start to feel somewhat financially better. But the second big part of it was, we are going to be competent. This is going to be adults in the room, competent government after years of Tory turmoil following the Brexit vote that progressively got crazier and crazier, culminating in Liz Truss. Now, initially, people thought he would do that because he had turned around the Labour Party from its massive defeat under Jeremy Corbyn, all of that infighting, all of the bad blood, the anti-Semitism, those battles. He'd managed to fix the party and make it an election-winning machine. But he has struggled to put the right people into Downing Street consistently. We've seen a high turnover in staff. And that lack of grip at the centre, I think, has really been his undoing, because he struggles with the sunnier uplands. And you can on every economic indicator, as Joe Biden saw, people can actually be doing better. But if you're not selling it to them that life is getting better and really doing that and being the sunny uplands leader, they won't feel it.
Terry, you wrote a book on selling believable lies to a population. I mean, how you actually change behaviour and change attitudes is an incredibly difficult thing that the government was tasked with during the Second World War.
Yes, it is. And interestingly, one of the things that I found from researching that is that it works better if you stick close to the truth, and people would generally are more persuaded by things that they know to be true from what they see about them. So it's no point trying to tell people that everything is absolutely wonderful if from the evidence of their own eyes and their own pockets they can tell that things aren't. But I think one of the problems here that this government has had, as Vinny points out, is getting this message across. I mean, in the last couple of days, there's been an article by somebody who was a former head of political strategy in Downing Street complaining that it was really difficult to get things done and it was really difficult to make government do things. And you kind of think, well, that was kind of your job. That was kind of in the job title. And that, you with a big majority, you should be able to get things done, or at least to explain to people what the problems are. And I think one of the difficulties, there's an article here in the Sunday Times describing the mood inside Downing Street as one of mounting paranoia. I mean, that is never a good sign, but it's also talking about not being able to persuade Labour MPs that they're doing the right thing, and particularly because you've got some Labour MPs in places that have never had Labour MPs who are trying to deal with things like farming and stuff, and they're not really sure how to deal with that.
Take us back to the Second World War, when the government has actually sort of stuck as close as possible to the truth to try to persuade, cajole and bring around a public which is in crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking really at British propaganda to the rest of Europe, so to occupied and then subsequently liberated Europe. But the interesting thing that I think they found when they were telling German soldiers in particular that the war is ending, and that these people were used to having heard total propaganda from their own side, and actually telling them the truth, saying now is the time to give up, now is the time to surrender, explaining to them what had actually gone on and the truth that they weren't able to hear from their own side. That was the most persuasive thing. And that, in some cases, whether in Germany or Italy, did manage to persuade people to, literally stick their hands up, put a white flag up and say, OK, I've had enough. So that was the best thing. And it worked better than telling people rumours and spreading lies, which was something they tried to do in the early part of the war when they didn't have the force to put that into practice.
I think there's a point here, and it came out in the article that you're referring to, a former Starmer advisor talking about the problems with Downing Street. It came out as well in the sort of 20-year release of government papers from Tony Blair's days. Tony Blair's government had a plan to actually move the operation of the Prime Minister out of Downing Street. It would still be the residence and the meeting room, and where foreign dignitaries always love a photo at the black door. But I think fundamentally, and multiple Prime Ministers have said this now, the system that we have here in the UK of Downing Street is broken, because unlike other nations, the leader, Downing Street doesn't actually have a government department really behind it. It has the Cabinet Office, but it's the centre of government. But departments increasingly are run as fiefdoms of very powerful civil servants. And as Keir Starmer has said, you come in, you pull a lever and nothing happens. And I think fundamentally at the core in Britain, a problem consistently has been that the Downing Street model is no longer fit for purpose, and they need to try and come up with a better department that can run this country.
We have 4 scant minutes at the end of a very busy Monocle on Sunday. Terry, you wanted to talk to us about the Loch Ness Monster, or rather a man and the Loch Ness Monster. This is a commitment longer than many marriages and longer than some lives, of a man who's the patron saint of sort of lost causes.
I would like to talk about, praise Adrian Shine. He's given an exclusive interview to the Aberdeen Press and Journal today.
Which is not an easy thing to come about.
And he arrived in Loch Ness. He arrived from Surrey, having been a schoolboy who wanted to travel the world and go sailing, always wanted adventure. Went to Scotland in 1973, aged 24, arrived on the shores with a camera taped to a spotlight, a tent, and hired a rowing boat. And ever since then, he has been looking for evidence of the Loch Ness Monster, but he decided within about 2 years that there was no Loch Ness Monster. And yet, despite this, he has devoted the rest of his life to studying it, to finding out why other people believe in the Loch Ness Monster, and just absolutely, by the sounds of it, living his best life and never deterred, never gave up, and just seems to have been really happy. So I think let's think about Adrian Shine at the beginning of this year and think about the joy of just doing things that you find really fascinating, not because anybody else does and people probably think you're mad, but, pursue that rabbit hole, pursue the thing that you love.
Just a quick thing for you, Vinny. I mean, this man is glorious. He looks like Charles Darwin, for starters. He has a magnificent face and even better beard. I mean, that idea that you're going to commit to something which you know may never bring fruit.
Yeah, it is quite a fun tale. Loch Ness is very good, I think, as well at doing PR. There's always a sighting just before the school holidays to try and get tourists up there. I think another man,
you
though...
cynic!
I think another man, though, that we should look at is someone called Jim Moylan, who has sadly passed away recently, but the Wall Street Journal have written an excellent piece about him. Someone who made a problem that he faced, that I think many of us have faced, and decided to do something about it. So he was a Ford engineer. He took a car from the hire centre at the plant to go and do something, and it was almost out of petrol, and he got to the petrol pump. He realised, though, that the petrol valve was on the other side of the car. He had to drive around, he had to stand in the rain to get it all sorted, and he went back and immediately wrote a memo to the directors of the company and said, we should put a little symbol, a little arrow on the dashboard by the petrol pump so people know which side to fill up on. And if you've taken any car since, it was rolled out on all Ford models within a year, and then every other company in the world has copied it. So if you didn't know what that little arrow is, it's to guide you. And I think we should all be saying thank you to Jim Moylan.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to, for the tiny things that help, I'm going to thank the brilliant IKEA for making little dents in the bottom of cups, which means that when you put them in the dishwasher, they don't accumulate a pool of soggy water at the top. When you remove them, the water will flow out. So these tiny fixes in life that bring possibly undetected joy. What have you found, Terry?
I didn't know that about the cups. I'm fascinated by that. I can't think. I'm sure there are some lovely, things that do make your life easier. But let's hope we find more of them in 2026.
Yes, I think we could do that. How about you, Vinny? What have you found that sort of bringing joy that we probably didn't? The problems that we didn't realise that we needed solving in life.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm just struggling to think at the moment. I did not know that about the cups, though. That is an interesting one.
Everybody, go and have a look at your dishwashers. If you have an IKEA cup, they saved the dishwasher. Let's leave it there. That's all the time we have for today's programme, and the warmest of thanks to all my guests: Terry Stiasny, Vincent McAviney, Lars Vavanger, Alexis Self, Laura Kramer, and our editorial director Tyler Brûlé. Thanks too to the producers Desiree Bandy, Mariella Bevan, Tom Webb, and our studio engineer was David Stevens this weekend. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday returns next week, but until then, goodbye. Thank you for listening, and a happy new year.